Get ready, because it's time for a pop quiz. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the movie The Exorcist. Even if you haven't seen it, you probably know the basic gist of it. A girl gets possessed by a demon, the creature torments her and her family, then a priest attempts to remove the demon from the girl's body. This movie came out in 1973, and since then there have been about 12 million stories exactly like it. Somebody gets possessed, the monster becomes a threat, then the demon has to be removed. I've seen it, you've seen it, it's a tired cliche. That brings us back to our pop quiz. Here's the question. How do you take the demonic possession trope and make it fresh again? If someone hired you to write a novel or a script about this subject, what would you do to make it original? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we're going to look at two types of originality, large scale and small scale. We'll start with the big stuff first. When we're talking about large-scale originality, we're talking about a unique story concept. Now, a concept is the basic plan that lays the groundwork for a story, and it involves placing ideas in a specific context. For example, back in the 90s, there was this obscure little movie called Titanic. It took the idea of Romeo and Juliet and placed it in the context of the Titanic's voyage. In other words, you had a familiar idea in a fresh context. Another 90s movie that went completely under the radar is Jurassic Park. This one took a fresh idea of cloning dinosaurs and placed it in the familiar context of a horror story, or more specifically, a haunted house story in which a sin is committed and the monsters punish those responsible.
Clever girl.
If you want large-scale originality, the idea and/or the context it appears in needs to be fresh. On the other hand, if you bring a familiar idea into a familiar context, you'll end up with a safe and basic concept. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this, and in fact, some audiences love these types of stories. They love stories that stick to the basics. Hallmark has a channel full of these types of movies. They're not groundbreaking, but they entertain audiences and give them what they want. Another example would be The Conjuring. This movie is about paranormal investigators who investigate a haunted house. It's a basic concept, yet many audiences enjoy this type of story. Now, as we mentioned, if you do want to create an original concept, either the idea or the context needs to be fresh. You can have a fresh idea in a familiar context, and this can spice up a story genre. Think about Dexter. It's about a serial killer who only kills bad guys, and that's a fresh idea that appears within the familiar context of a police drama. Then you have House MD, a show about a brilliant doctor who hates everybody, including his own patients. Fresh idea, and it appears within the familiar context of a medical drama. Alternatively, you might want to take a familiar idea and place it in a fresh context. We already talked about this with Titanic, and another example would be Into the Spider-Verse. You have the familiar idea of Spider-Man, and you make it original again by putting it within the context of a multiverse story where he has to team up with other versions of the character. Finally, you can also have a fresh idea meeting a fresh context. This is something you typically see with bizarre or experimental stories, stuff like Eraserhead. I'd also argue that Attack on Titan fits here as well. You have this fresh context where people are walled off from the outside world, and these giant monsters try to break in and eat them. Then you combine it with the fresh idea of a young boy seeking to eradicate these titans by transforming into one himself. So as you can see, there are multiple ways to create a story concept, and the sweet spot usually involves combining the familiar with the fresh. Audiences like what they recognize, but they also like it when that stuff feels new again. Let's go back to our pop quiz question, which is how do you make demonic possession fresh again? The 2023 movie Late Night with the Devil does this by combining the battle-tested trope of demonic possession with the unique context of a 70s late-night talk show. Now, I won't spoil anything major in this movie since it's relatively new, but the basic plot is that the show's host, Jack Delroy, is desperate for higher ratings. On Halloween, Jack invites on these guests who deal with the occult, namely a psychic, a skeptic, a paranormal psychologist, and yes, a demonically possessed little girl. Usually we see paranormal experts at haunted houses or graveyards, not on the set of a 70s talk show. By dropping such experts into a new location, a public location no less, we change how the possession trope is perceived. Instead of the conflict happening behind closed doors, it's on live TV, and that creates a tense new dynamic. It puts us on edge because privacy is gone. The public is watching, the stakes are high, and the characters make choices in front of millions of viewers. This transforms the story and makes the possession scenes feel new again. So that's large-scale originality. Now what about small scale? Well, that's where the writer's personal choices come in. The writing process is essentially a series of creative choices, and some choices are more critical than others. If you want your story to stand out as memorable or original, you have to do something different with key elements like character, world building, theme, plot, and so on. Usually the best place to start is with character, since characters are the heart of the story. If you give us predictable or cliched characters, you're likely going to end up with a forgettable story. Chances are you don't want that, so look for opportunities to go against the grain, especially when crafting your protagonist. Late Night with the Devil does this by giving Jack no personal connection to the possessed girl. Usually in these types of stories, there are steep personal stakes because the girl is the main character's daughter or someone else important to them. But here, she's just an unfortunate girl. Jack isn't obligated to help her, and that allows the story to explore him as a unique character, rather than as the generic father who has to perform the expected plot functions. Instead, Jack must choose between the girl's well-being and his career, and that creates a fresh dynamic by raising the question, how far will he go to save his TV show? For another example, let's look at the 2024 movie The Substance. This is about an aging actress who injects a special serum that creates a younger version of herself. Only one self can be active at a time, and they have to switch consciousness every 7 days. In other words, we have a fresh idea set within the familiar context of modern Hollywood. But even when it comes to the small scale, this movie displays originality by choosing to build around an aging actress rather than a young one. Too often we see stories where teenagers venture out to Hollywood and end up having their dreams crushed. But here we have a story that explores the aftermath of the dream. It raises questions like, how does a former star cope with losing stardom and being cast aside? What does it do to her psychologically? And how far will she go to reclaim the life she once had? This movie's concept alone was enough to make it original, but the small-scale originality is what makes the story matter. The personal character stuff is what brings everything to life. Unfortunately, some writers make the mistake of panicking because their concept doesn't seem original enough. If you find yourself in this position, relax and remember that small-scale originality is what's most important, because that's what creates emotional impact and keeps us engaged. Large-scale originality may be what sells tickets, but it's the small-scale stuff that creates loyal fans. So if you're working on a story, do your best with the big picture, but make sure that your characters are contributing something unique and memorable. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what is one recent story you enjoyed because of its originality? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of either one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And then Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers. It's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he can't put it down till he kills 6 people with it. Also be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Check out my other videos. Maybe even hit that super thanks button. And as always, remember to keep on writing.